So the other day I managed to pick up this pack of filters for the Mini 3 Pro from Amazon. I'll pop a link into the description for the video. They're made by a company called Skyreat. I've used them before and they gave decent results. This is one of the first packs that I've seen available for the Mini 3 Pro. There's quite a few listed on Amazon, but most of them say 3 to 4 weeks before they'll be available for delivery. The pack consists of 6 filters. There's a Polarizer, a neutral density 8, 16, 32, 64 and 128, which should cover most eventualities to help control the shutter speed for video. The 128 may even be useful for smoothing out water and that sort of thing, but we'll see. Inside the pack, if I can get it open, we get the filters obviously in a nice presentation box there, and a cleaning cloth, and that's it. Pretty standard for what you get in a pack of filters these days. The filters themselves, unlike the Mini 2, are more akin to the Mavic 2 Pro in that they clip onto the front of the lens assembly. It's quite easy to do, so we'll go through changing or adding one of the filters shortly. So once you've got a decent hold on the drone, which is sometimes easier said than done, essentially, let's get a good grip of you. Essentially you just twist the lens cover anti-clockwise slightly until it clicks and take it off. And then to attach a filter, it's the opposite, so you put it on slightly askew and then twist it clockwise until it locks into place. And that's it. Very simple, very easy. I found attaching filters to the Mini 2 quite tricky, but this seems to be a better solution. And you can pop your lens cover into the spare holder. If it closes, yes, it closes quite nicely, so there we go. They're supposedly very lightweight. The housings are made of plastic, but the actual filter itself is optical glass, so hopefully we should get decent results from them. What I'm going to do is take the drone out and hopefully on a nice sunny day test the filters one by one with a short flight to give an idea of how they work. Okay, so we've got a pretty standard British summer day here. As you can see, lots of cloud, changeable light conditions, but it's quite bright. So a good day for testing the filters. So what I'm going to do is pop the drone up with no filters on, find a flight path, and then we're going to repeat it with the filters on, and we'll compare to see whether we've got any colour cast and how much it manages to slow the shutter speed down by. Okay, so when I'm going taking it up to 60 meters in height, and to get a sensible exposure level, we're looking at 2,500ths of a second at ISO 100. White balance, let's just double check we've got that on. We've got it on auto, we want it on manual. So we'll check that to 5,400, which is where I normally like to keep it. Let's see if we can find a reference spot. So what I'm going to do is take the drone over to the left, because there's a public footpath there. So if by some means I do end up losing it, having just updated the firmware several times, I think we're going to be able to access it. Whereas if I send it over other land, we might not be able to, which would be upsetting to put it mildly. So I think we've pretty much got the route. I'm going to follow that third track in that you can see down the middle of the screen, possibly. The horizon's on a third, we're at 60 meters in height, and we have got no filter on currently. So I'm just going to fly it outwards for about 20 to 30 seconds to see where it takes us to. Okay, so we're approximately 100 meters away. Now I'm going to turn the drone around and bring it back so it's actually into the sun. And the exposure still looks good at that. I seem to have drifted over somewhat. Let's bring it back to that third track. Now we're going to time it out for approximately 30 seconds. I'm not going at full speed here. Okay, that should do it. Okay, so let's swap out that first filter. Okay, so the first one I'm going to pop on is the ND8. Okay, so straight away with the ND8 I can see that 1/2500th of a second, which is what we had before, is way too high. So let's see where that brings us down to exposure wise. So bang on with exposure 0.0 at 1/320th, which is obviously still too fast for decent video or decent motion blur in video. Okay, so here we are with the neutral density 8 on. Unfortunately the sun's gone in a little bit, nevertheless in the distance we can still see the exposure is nicely set out. Let's just run forward. Now we'll spin around again to face the other way, more or less back to where we came from. Now here we can see the fact that the sensor is exposing for the land and overexposing the sky. It's actually showing us 1 plus 0.3 of a stopover, so let's see if we can bring that shutter speed down a touch. Go away. Being attacked by a fly now. Okay, that should be correct exposure. It's now gone to +3. Let's bring it across and back to us. Neutral density 8 off and put the 16 on. It's fighting me for some reason this time. Get those out the way and off we go again. So interestingly, that 16 is rather suggesting that it's not much different to the 8. Nevertheless, underexposed slightly. Give us 1/320th, and still underexposed, 1/240th. Okay, so 1/240th seems to be bang on exposure wise. Let's take her out again. Nobody around, happy days, off we go. And for some reason the wind's getting up, that's always splendid, isn't it? And so we're coming up to 50% battery now, so I have to start watching that soon. Okay, with the ND16 on, I can't quite seem to find the correct exposure. 1/240th gives us 1/3 of a stop over, whereas 1/320th gives us 1/3 of a stop under, so we'll go with slightly under, I think. Okay, so we'll swap to we'll swap over to the ND32 now. Just my luck for the wind to blow this filter off here, wouldn't it? Why it's quite decided now is a good time to start getting up, I don't know. Probably just to thwart me. I've been waiting days to do this test as it is. Pop him back in his case before we lose him. That's probably not the best angle sun-wise, is it, for you guys? And there's stinging nettles over this side. And now it's decided to ask me if I want to do a pre-flight check. Quite why it's decided that, I'm not sure. Okay, with the ND32 on, as you can see the exposure is somewhat dark while we're on the ground, probably change when we're in the air. So I'll bring the shutter speed down again. 1/120th now, so we're getting there. Okay, so now we have the ND64 fitted, and as you'll probably be able to tell from the screenshot once I get the screen recorder going, it's looking a lot darker. So this should hopefully bring the shutter speed down nicely. So 1/40th of a second, that is now spot on. So I would say the 64 would probably be the best filter to use for today's conditions. So to be honest, it'd be worth me making a mental note of that one, because I'm never quite sure which one to pick. Okay, so what we can see here, obviously assuming this screen recording turns out okay, is that since we took off, we've actually increased light level, so it's now 0.7 of a stop overexposed. So I'm just going to bring that shutter speed up slightly, and it's now saying 1/80th of a second. Interesting. Now here we can see the fundamental problem with using these sorts of filters. Obviously turning the aircraft around in the other direction has changed the exposure, as you'll probably expect. The light levels are different, but it's quite significantly altered it. So we're now underexposed by 0.7 of a stop, and 1/60th seems to be calling it, but personally I think the ground's still a bit underexposed at that. Nevertheless, I still think the 64 is the filter for these conditions. Okay, well, I'm currently a second battery at the moment, so I've got 3, so we shouldn't have a problem finishing this, but you think when you're doing these sorts of things that it's going to be a relatively straightforward and quick process. And believe you me, it really isn't. So let's see what sort of numbers we get with the 128 attached. I've got a feeling this won't be way too dark for these conditions, but we can put it on and see what sort of speeds we get. It also doesn't help that the sun's gone in again. Okay, so as expected, the exposure is way too dark, so I'll just see what sort of speeds we get down to. So 1/30th of a second is as low as we can go, and it's still one stop underexposed, so we're going to have to raise the ISO, or ISO depending on your point of view. So we've had to go to ISO 200, but we now have a 0.0 exposure. So we take it out, fly it back and see how we go. So ideally we want to be filming at about 1/50th of a second, because I'm using 25 frames per second on the video. So 1/50th will be the perfect exposure, and here it is actually coming out at 1/50th. It's perfect now, the lights come out. Interesting. I suspect that's going to change as we come back in the other direction, or probably as we get airborne as well, but let's have a look and see. So we've already gone, I say we've already gone underexposed, but it's literally just popped back up now. Okay, so with the, forgot which one it is now, 128, aren't we? With the 128 on, I'll turn it round, face into the sun. It's now saying it's slightly overexposed, but again, if we look at the ground, quite honestly, the ground needs lifting a bit. Having said that, it's probably going to be easier to correct it for shadows than it is for highlights being blown out. So it's saying 1/80th of a second for 128 into the sun. These drones do tend to expose for the highlights there. Anyway, let's bring her back. And just as a little test, I'm going to adjust the exposure for the ground. So I think 1/50th is probably it, as I thought. 1/50th or 1/40th, and it's probably going to be spot on for the ground. So let's bring her down. The last one to test is the Polarizer. Now obviously the Polarizer is a slightly different proposition really to the neutral density filters. They do bring the exposure down very slightly, but that's not their primary function. What they would normally do is deepen blues in the sky, basically improve the saturation, and most interestingly cut down reflection and glare from water and wetness on the ground. So I'm going to do a slightly different test with this one, just to see what its general effect on the video is. All this video is obviously taken with the automatic setting. No, that's not true, not the automatic setting. Manual exposure settings, but I'm not using DJI or anything fancy like that, because obviously with DJI you can grade to your heart's content, so to some extent it would take something away from the test, because it would be down to my grading as opposed to what the drone's actually shooting. Hey, she's awake. So as I say, with the Polarizer on, I'm not going to worry unduly about the same route that we flew before. I might echo it, it's quite a nice view. So exposure wise, we're up at 1,000th of a second again. Actually 1/250th, 1/1000th. And slightly overexposed at 1/1000th, it says. I'm not sure I believe it. ISO is back down to 100. Let's see if we can see any difference in the colour reproduction. I assume we're still ISO 5400. Yes, we are. For some reason I'm shooting 30 frames per second, but never mind, still get a good idea. Yeah, I think we can see straight away it's brought out a beautiful definition in the sky. Okay, so that pretty much concludes the test. I've tried out all the filters. Hopefully we've got the exposure settings more or less where they should be. Why do dog hairs get everywhere? So I just put the original lens protector back on, pack away, and then pop home for some tea. After the trials and tribulations updating the last few days, nice to spend some time actually flying the machine. So if you've enjoyed this video or found it useful, I'd appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.